Although I've lived in Houston for the past 18 years, I'm originally from Lafayette, Louisiana, the heart of Cajun country, about 200 miles to the east. Flying to my hometown to visit family and see the region's wetland scenery from the air is something I've been wanting to do for some time, and with several consecutive days in August of light wind and nil rain chances, it was time to finally make the trip. Lafayette Regional is a Class Charlie airport I wasn't particularly interested in landing at, but fortunately my uncle, a private airplane pilot, had room for me in the hangar he's sharing in Opelousas just north of Lafayette. My plan would be to follow the coast for the flight out, mainly for the scenery and smooth air. I need to make a fuel stop at some point, and there are no airports along the coast past Galveston, so I'd make a detour to Winnie for gas. I'd stay 2 nights in Lafayette, circumnavigating Lafayette's Class C airspace for some local sightseeing on the second day, and returning the third via a more direct route for a change of scenery. I took off at about 2 p.m. The flight was expected to take about 4.5 hours, and with a half-hour fuel stop, I planned to arrive in Opelousas at 7 p.m., 1 hour before sunset. I headed due east until I came to Texas City. My plan was to follow the dike as an emergency landing option, as I did when returning from my Galveston flight, but this time I'd head to the Boulevard Peninsula instead of Galveston Island. You can see Galveston and Pelican Islands to my right here, and the Boulevard Peninsula to my left. This is a Margaritaville RV resort. The coastal air was pleasantly smooth, but eventually I had to leave the coast to head to Winnie. My route took me over the wetlands of Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. I had a bit of a crosswind landing at Winnie, and it wasn't my best. After leaving Winnie, I headed east over more wetlands to the southern tip of Port Arthur and followed the Sabine Pass back to the coast. There's a massive construction project underway along the Port Arthur ship channel. I'm not sure what it is, but there's a liquefied natural gas terminal a little ways down. I thought these rigs were pretty cool. I crossed the pass to another LNG terminal. Since the pass marks the border between Louisiana and Texas, this is the point where I enter Louisiana and my first time flying to another state. Here's the historic Sabine Pass Lighthouse, first lit in 1857, but long since abandoned. Then it was back to smooth coastal flying. This is a shrimp trawler. I never realized how much sediment they stir up. Louisiana isn't known for its beaches, but Holly Beach here, also known as the Cajun Riviera, is decent enough to support a small resort community. Here's one more LNG terminal at the Calcasieu Ship Channel. Eventually the coastline turned southeast, So I left it at Rutherford Beach, heading east-northeast over extensive marshland. This area is a private hunting lodge owned by a Lafayette native and oil executive now living in Houston. It isn't accessible by road, so has its own airport. This is Grand Lake to my left. The marshes give way to rice fields after crossing the Intracoastal Waterway. Rice is a key component of nearly every Cajun dish, but until flying over the region I had no idea just how much of it is grown here. The town of Crowley, seen here in the distance, is nicknamed Rice Capital of the World. I reached Opelousas right on schedule. St. Landry Parish Airport may at first glance look like a busy airport with 3 runways, but only 2 of them are actually in use, with the east end of the third being used as an apron for hangars. I can't find any information about the history of the airport, but I suspect it was originally a military airfield converted to civilian use. My dad and uncle were awaiting my arrival, so I was glad to be on time.
You made it. That doesn't look like the most comfortable thing to be sitting in for that many hours.
I took off the next day around 4:30 p.m. for my local sightseeing flight. My first destination was the Evangeline Downs Horse Racetrack Hotel and Casino. The name Evangeline appears a lot in this region, owing to the poem of the same name by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow about the expulsion of the Acadians, the ancestors of the Cajuns. Next up was the Atchafalaya Basin, the largest swamp in the United States. The basin is most known through the I-10 bridge that crosses it. Here's another Margaritaville RV resort in Breaux Bridge. At over 18 miles in length, the Basin Bridge is the 3rd longest bridge in the country. The 1st and 2nd longest are also in Louisiana. Continuing south, I eventually came to vast fields of sugarcane. And here's the town of Jeanerette, also known as Sugar City. This was once the site of a radar-equipped tethered balloon the government used to monitor the border. A number of these sites can be found along the border, but you can't get close to most of them as they're still operational and the airspace around them restricted. This large body of water is Vermilion Bay, which empties into the Gulf. The road here is one of the few places you can reach the Louisiana coast by car. The road ends at a cape called Sycamore Point. Interestingly, this sectional notes it as Dead Cypress Point, but I've never actually heard anyone call it that. The buildings here are mostly primitive weekend getaways called camps. Fishing is the main draw here, but there is also a yacht club. Here's Sycamore Point State Park with its man-made beach, since there aren't any natural ones in the area. This is the Morton Salt Company's facility at the Weeks Island Salt Dome. There are several salt domes in this area called islands as they raise slightly above the surrounding terrain. This is Avery Island, another salt dome. It's most famous for being the place where Tabasco sauce is made. We now come to our last salt dome on the tour, Jefferson Island. The dome is actually under the lake here, which was significantly expanded after a bizarre incident in 1980 where a drilling rig punctured a salt mine near the lake, creating a sinkhole that swallowed 11 barges and 65 acres of surrounding land. Just south of Jefferson Island is the town of Delcambre. I continued south until I reached Intracoastal City on Vermilion Bay, and then followed the Intracoastal Waterway west for a bit. Heading north, my next destination was the town of Rain. I used to play keyboards in a band at the church here. Rain is known as the frog capital of the world due to its frog leg exports. I had to include a few more rice field shots. I arrived back at Opelousas a little after 7 p.m. The flight was only around 3 hours, so I didn't need a fuel stop. I set out on my return voyage the next day around 3 p.m. Since this was a more direct route, it would only take about 4 hours of flying. I couldn't pass an opportunity to see this coal plant near Lake Charles. I couldn't get too close to the city due to airspace considerations. I was surprised to see this castle-inspired house nearby, complete with crenellated parapets. My route eventually intersected I-10, which I followed a ways. Here's where it crosses the Sabine River, marking the boundary between Louisiana and Texas. I'd driven this route and stopped at this rest area many times. I stopped for fuel in Orange just past the state line. The approach into the airport is interesting as it overflies a large rail yard and under construction plastic plant. Continuing west on I-10 led me to Beaumont, Texas. After Beaumont, I-10 turns more southerly, so I continued a more gentle slope towards Trinity Bay. Here's where the Trinity River empties into the bay. That's a lot of warehouses. I followed State Highway 146 south along the bay to clear Hobby's airspace. Here's the Fred Hartman Bridge. There were a couple of container terminals and numerous chemical plants along the ship channel. Further south along 146, I came to Clear Lake and the Kemo Boardwalk. I'd flown over this area before, so from here on out it was familiar turf. Brazos Bend State Park looks pretty meager after the extensive wetlands I'd flown over on this trip. I returned to Wharton just before sunset. Although I'd flown longer round-robin flights, this trip was easily the furthest I'd been from my point of origin, and my first multi-day trip, so it was a big step for me. The coastal wetland scenery was unreal and ever-changing, and flying over places I'd grown up seeing from the ground gave me a literal new perspective on them. Furthermore, aside from the area between Wharton and Galveston, everything I flew over was new to me, so there was a great deal to see. This was easily my favorite flying trip to date, and the realization of a goal I had ever since I was a student pilot.